To better understand the risks of Ant Group, I'm going to share research that was published by RWR Advisory Group. RWR is headed by Roger Robinson, and Roger is a friend and a regular guest in the Economic War Room. As you may recall, Roger helped lead the fight against the Thrift Savings Plan investing in China, the TSP. He wants us to be pro-America rather than pro-China, and we've covered his research in episodes 65 and 69. You viewers helped us dodge a serious bullet because what we did is we brought you Roger's research and you made the case that the TSP should not invest in Chinese companies. And you know what? We were successful. We were able to stop it because we brought it to the attention of the government and President Trump. So our active duty military is no longer funding Chinese companies that would be aimed at us. Neither are our veterans, neither are our public servants or our retirees. But the Chinese Communist Party is sneaky. They found a workaround to get even more American money. If they're successful, many Americans may be unwittingly funding our adversary, and we can't let that happen. I'm going to summarize the RWR report so you understand all the critical risk factors. And then we're going to give you action steps that you can take to protect your family and also our nation. Don't forget, we produce a full battle plan that will cover this RWR report and provide you those action steps in an easy-to-follow format. You can get the battle plan at economicwarroom.com. And the first thing you need to know is that the IPO for Ant Group is not going to take place in New York. Alibaba IPO'd in New York. This one on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange and the Shanghai Stock Exchange. That doesn't mean that Wall Street's not involved, though. This offering is being managed by China International Capital Corporation, but the joint lead managers are reported as Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. That makes it a very American offering. It also opens the door to get lots of American money either directly or indirectly. And they get to crow that they debuted it in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which they claim is better than the American exchange, better than the New York Stock Exchange. Let me quote from the RWR report. It says, according to the Center for Financial Research and Analysis, however, U.S. investors will likely gain first exposure to Ant Group securities through Renaissance Capital's International IPO ETF. Now let me interject here. I know Renaissance Capital. I was invited to attend one of their conferences in Moscow. They're going to have an ETF and they're going to stick this in it and sell it to American investors. Keep that in mind. It goes on to say, analysts expected an expedited timeline for the company's inclusion in other major ETFs, such as the Vanguard FTSE Emerging Markets and the iShares Core MSCI Emerging Markets ETF, given the size and liquidity of Ant Group. As a result, Ant Group is on track to benefit substantially from inclusion in these U.S. indexes, tracked by trillions of dollars in ETFs, despite national security concerns. That's the end quote. Let me translate that. Because of the size of the IPO and all the money that's going to be made from it, the four powerhouse firms of Wall Street are involved. It's almost certain that Ant Group shares will find their way into the appropriate index funds and ETFs that you may have in your portfolio. This means that all of your broker or financial advisor needs to do is they need to make sure that those ETFs don't have these holdings. The RWR report also mentions that some national security risks may not be disclosed to you, and that's the real point here. Most Americans see this as an investment, but there are very real and potentially undisclosed risks that they never considered. So let me read some more from the RWR report. It says, quote, Ant Group's Hong Kong Stock Exchange prospectus discloses potential financial technology and e-commerce sectoral risks, but largely glosses over other important risk factors that potentially threaten the firm's corporate reputation, such as the company's ties through ownership and business involvements with the Chinese Communist Party. In our view, it also inadequately addresses the national security and human rights risks associated with data security and privacy concerns. Then it says, see the 55-page risk factors section of the prospectus that begins on page 30. So you get a prospectus, you're about to invest in something, you flip through, there's 55 pages of risk factors. And according to RWR, they don't properly disclose enough of those risks. Let me translate that. In all 55 pages of risk factors, the prospectus doesn't really explain the risks associated with being in business with the Chinese Communist Party and them having access to all the data. For one thing, you should understand that the Communist Party claims the right to look at anything inside a company that does business in China. Remember, Google was operating in China and they pulled out because the Communist Party insisted on seeing some of the Google data. Oh, no, we protect our customers. The troubling thing, Google's back in China now. But that's another issue. You should know that in July, a group of human rights activists called on Attorney General Barr to designate the Chinese Communist Party as a transnational criminal organization. A transnational criminal organization, like a big international mob. If Attorney General Barr did this, and he implemented Executive Order 13773, those who owned Ant Group shares would find themselves funding the expansion of a group overseen by a transnational criminal organization that has access to the data of at least 1 billion people and $18 trillion of transactions. That risk, according to the RWR report, is not fully disclosed. Before the next break, let's run down the 7 hidden risk factors that are listed here in the RWR report. Number 1, Ant Group had a failed MoneyGram acquisition in the U.S. Just 2 years ago, Ant Financial tried to buy MoneyGram. You know, MoneyGram, you go in a grocery store, you want to send money. MoneyGram is a Dallas-based payment system. They offered $1.2 billion so Ant Group could own all of MoneyGram, but the deal was abandoned over concerns from the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, also known as CFIUS. CFIUS felt that if the Ant Group owned MoneyGram, it might pose a serious national security risk. But you know what? That's not fully disclosed to investors. Their failed MoneyGram acquisition points out a real risk. European competitive bidder for MoneyGram said this in their report on Ant Group. They said, quote, Ant Financial does not meet the standards to assume the responsibilities of a U.S. money transmitter. This includes demonstrating an ability to protect sensitive personal information on U.S. citizens and military personnel, as well as the need to uphold and participate in U.S. federal and state efforts related to regulating anti-terrorism financing and money laundering, end quote. If that was true then what's changed to make this okay now? And is that something that you want to be part of? Do you want Citigroup, JP Morgan Chase, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs involved in that? Absolutely not. Number 2, Ant's role in mass detention and surveillance. One of Ant's investments is a facial recognition artificial intelligence startup that was sanctioned by the U.S. government and added to the entity list by the Commerce Department for having, quote, implicated in human rights violations and abuses in the implementation of China's campaign of repression, mass arbitrary detention, and high-technology surveillance, end quote. Again, do you want your money connected to that? Well, let's run through risks 3 through 7, which are pretty self-explanatory. Number 3, the Ant technology has military dual-use potential. We don't want to be funding efforts for the Chinese army, but if you fund Ant Group, you might be supporting technology aimed at our troops. 4, the Ant technology is being used in China's social credit scoring system. That's creepy and Orwellian. It denies basic human rights and freedom of expression. For those unfamiliar with the social credit system, it's a means for the government to control the population. You get rewarded for good behavior and punished for bad. China invented this data-driven Big Brother approach, and Ant Group technology is used in this. Do you want to fund that? Now, think about it. I know there are some governors in New York, Michigan, and California who would want this technology installed in their state, but I don't want somebody monitoring me 24/7 through my phone whether or not I'm wearing a mask. Joe Biden wins the White House, maybe he wants it for the whole country. Point number 5, the Ant platform has a poor record of privacy protection, and then that's according to Chinese own internal cyber watchdog, the Cyberspace Administration of China, or CAC. Think about that. The nation that has the most government hackers on the planet is worried about Ant Group's cybersecurity. Number 6, Ant Group has close ties to a corrupt Chinese Communist Party. In fact, in a 2017 interview, Jack Ma said, as long as the country needs it, we are ready to dedicate Alipay to the country at any time, end quote. That's the Ant Group founder stating without hesitation that he belongs to the Communist Party. They want to de-Americanize the world. And finally, if those 6 weren't enough, here's number 7. Alipay is vulnerable to escalating geopolitical tensions. We talk about those all the time. If they get worse, Alipay could be an enemy, not a friend. It should seem obvious that there are very real and hidden risks for Americans who get stuck in Ant Group shares. That's why this is such an important episode. We can't hand the Chinese another $30 billion to use against us. We need to take another break, but when we come back, we'll walk through the things you can do to protect your family, your investments, and our nation.